Somewhere in the ancient world, long before cities rose and long before names were written in stone, there was a land that no longer exists. A land where people once walked, where rivers flowed gently, where animals moved across wide green plains. It was not a small place. It was vast, stretching between what we now call islands and continents. And then one day the water came. Not slowly, not gently, but in a way that changed everything forever. Now, as you settle in and allow your mind to slow down, let us gently step into this forgotten moment in history. Tonight, we are not just learning, we are drifting through time. We are going to explore a story that is quiet, mysterious, and almost lost, a story of a great flood that reshaped the world. And as we move slowly through this story, you may begin to wonder, how could a single event change the map of the earth? And more quietly, why do we remember so little about it? Let us begin. Imagine a time around 6,500 years ago. The world was very different then. The air felt cleaner, the forests were thicker, and the oceans were still slowly rising after the end of the last ice age. Huge glaciers which had once covered much of the earth were melting, but they were not melting all at once. They were melting slowly over many years, sometimes quietly, sometimes suddenly. And in this slow melting, something important was happening. The level of the sea was rising. Now, to understand this, let us think of something simple. Imagine you have a large bowl filled with ice and a little bit of water. As the ice melts, the water level slowly increases. Not in a dramatic way, but little by little, almost unnoticeable at first. This is what was happening to the Earth, but instead of a bowl, it was the entire planet. And instead of small pieces of ice, there were glaciers the size of countries. Now there was a place, a very special place, between what we now call Britain and mainland Europe. Today, if you look at a map, you will see water between them. But back then, there was no water there. There was land, wide, open, living land. This land is known today as Doggerland, but the people who lived there had no such name for it. To them, it was simply home. Imagine walking across that land, soft grass under your feet, a cool wind moving across the plains, rivers gently flowing filled with fish, animals moving in the distance, and small groups of humans living simple lives. They hunted, they gathered food, they followed the seasons, they watched the sky. There were no cities, no roads, no borders, just land and life and time moving slowly. As time passes slowly, something begins to change. At first, it is almost impossible to notice. The rivers begin to widen. The ground near the coast becomes softer. Some areas that were once dry begin to feel damp. The sea is rising, but it is rising so slowly that no single person notices the full change. It happens across generations. A grandfather might remember land that his grandson will never see. A place where people once walked slowly disappears under water. But even then, life continues. People move slightly inland, they adjust, they adapt, because humans are very good at adapting. But this raises a quiet question: what happens when change is no longer slow? Far to the north, under the cold waters near what we now call Norway, There was something unstable. Deep beneath the ocean floor, layers of sediment had been building for thousands of years. Sand, mud, and rock slowly stacking on top of each other. And over time, this underwater land became weak. Now imagine stacking wet sand. At first it holds, but if the weight becomes too much or if something disturbs it, it suddenly collapses. This is exactly what happened. One day, without warning, a massive part of the ocean floor collapsed. This event is known today as the Storegga Slide. But at that time, no one had a name for it. No one even knew it had happened, at least not yet. Because when the ocean floor collapsed, it did not stay quiet, it moved violently. And when something so large moves under the ocean, the water above it moves too. A wave began to form, not like the waves you see at a beach. Not gentle, not small. This was something much larger, something powerful, something unstoppable. The wave moved outward across the sea, faster than anything the people of Doggerland had ever seen. Now, imagine standing on that ancient land. The day feels normal. The sky is calm. The air is still. Nothing seems unusual. And then perhaps someone notices something strange. The sea begins to pull back. Water that was once near the shore starts to disappear. Fish are left behind, struggling in the open air. The shoreline stretches farther than it ever has. This is not normal. But the people do not yet understand what it means. Because what comes next is something they have never seen before. In the distance, a line begins to form. At first it is small, almost like a shadow, but slowly it grows. The line becomes a wall, a moving wall of water, rising higher and higher, and then it arrives. The wave crashes onto the land, not gently, not slowly, but with immense force. Water rushes forward, trees are torn from the ground, animals are swept away. Homes, if they can even be called that, disappear instantly. The land that once felt stable is now chaos, and it does not stop with one wave. More water follows, flooding deeper into the land, changing everything. Some areas are completely destroyed, others are permanently flooded. The shape of the land begins to change. And in this moment, Doggerland begins to disappear. Now, let us pause here for a moment and think quietly. This was not just a natural event. It was a moment where human life and the earth itself collided in a powerful way. But this raises another quiet question. Did anyone survive? Did anyone remember? Or did this story slowly fade into silence? We will move deeper into this mystery next, but for now, let your mind rest with this image: a vast land, a sudden wave, and a world quietly changing forever. As the water settles slowly, almost quietly, what remains is not the same land anymore. The world has shifted, not in a way that can be easily seen all at once, but in a deep, lasting way. The wide green plains of Doggerland are no longer whole. Parts of it are gone forever, hidden beneath the cold, dark sea. Other parts remain, but they are changed, broken, separated, and slowly, over time, even those parts begin to disappear as the sea continues to rise. Now, let us imagine the people who may have survived, because it is very likely that some did. Perhaps they were far from the coast. Perhaps they saw the water coming and ran. Or perhaps they were simply lucky. These survivors would have found themselves in a very different world, places they once knew gone, paths they once walked vanished, rivers changed, land reduced, and something else would have changed too: their understanding of the world. Because when something so powerful happens, it leaves a mark not just on the land but on the mind. They may not have understood what caused the wave. They may not have known about collapsing ocean floors or shifting sediments, but they would have remembered the feeling, the sound, the sight of water rising where it should not rise. And so they carried that memory, not in books, not in maps, but in stories. Stories told softly from one generation to the next, perhaps around a fire at night, perhaps as a warning, perhaps as a mystery. A story of a great water that came suddenly and took everything. Now, as time passes slowly, generations come and go, the survivors move. They travel toward higher land, toward what we now call mainland Europe, toward what we now call Britain. But here is something very interesting. At this time, Britain was not an island. It was still connected to Europe by land, which means the people who once lived in Doggerland may have walked on foot into what would one day become an island. And they would have carried their memories with them, their skills, their way of life, their quiet stories of water and loss. But the earth was not finished changing. The sea continued to rise, not as suddenly as before, but steadily, quietly, patiently. Year after year, more land was taken, more connections were lost. And eventually the land bridge that connected Britain to Europe disappeared beneath the water. Britain became an island. Now think about that for a moment. An entire piece of land separated from the rest of a continent, not by human decision, but by the slow and powerful movement of nature. And somewhere in that long process, the final traces of Doggerland were gone. What was once a living land became part of the sea floor, hidden, silent, forgotten. But here is where the story becomes even more interesting, because even though Doggerland disappeared, it did not vanish completely. It left behind clues, very small clues, quiet clues. For thousands of years, no one knew it existed. People looked at the sea between Britain and Europe and assumed it had always been there. But then something unexpected began to happen. Fishermen working in the North Sea started pulling strange things out of their nets, not just fish, but bones, large bones, ancient bones. At first, this was confusing because these were not bones from sea animals. They were from land animals, mammoths, deer, even tools made by humans. This raised a quiet but powerful question. How did land animals end up at the bottom of the sea? Now let us move a little deeper. Scientists began to study these discoveries, slowly, carefully, piece by piece. They mapped the sea floor, they looked at patterns, they studied the shape of the land beneath the water, and what they found was surprising. Beneath the sea, there were shapes that looked like rivers, valleys, hills. It was not just empty ocean floor, it was a landscape, a drowned landscape. And slowly, the picture became clearer. There had once been a land there, a large land, a place where animals lived, where humans walked, where rivers flowed. Doggerland was real. Now imagine this moment of discovery. After thousands of years, a lost world quietly reveals itself again, not in full, not completely, but enough to be understood. This is how history often works. It does not return all at once. It returns in fragments, in small pieces, in clues that must be gently connected. And as scientists continued their work, they began to understand more. They realized that Doggerland was not destroyed in a single moment alone. Yes, the Great Wave played a role, a powerful role, but it was part of a larger process. The rising sea, the melting ice, the changing climate, all of these work together slowly over time. The wave may have been the moment of sudden change, but the story itself was long, gradual, quiet. And this raises another gentle question. If such a large land could disappear, what else might we have forgot? What other stories lie beneath the surface waiting to be found? As you continue to rest and let your thoughts drift, consider this: the world we see today feels permanent, stable, unchanging, but in truth it is always moving, always shifting, always becoming something new. Mountains rise, rivers change, seas expand, and sometimes entire lands disappear. Doggerland is just one example, a quiet reminder that the earth has a long memory, even if we do not. Now, let us move even deeper into this story because there is still more to understand, more to feel, more to quietly discover. As we move a little deeper into this quiet story, let us slow down even more and gently look at the lives that once existed on that lost land. Because Doggerland was not empty. It was not just a piece of land waiting to disappear. It was alive. Imagine early morning on that ancient plain. A soft mist rests over the grass. The air is cool, calm, and still. In the distance, a group of deer move slowly, their Arabic ket, Arabic tot, Arabic wow, Arabic halif, Arabic ta, light and careful. Birds call softly across the sky. And near a winding river, a small group of humans begins their day. They wake with the light, not because of clocks or alarms, but because of the sun. Their lives are simple but not easy. They understand the land. They understand the seasons. They know where to find food, where to find water, where to stay safe. There is no written knowledge, no maps, no instructions. Everything they know lives in memory, in experience, in observation. And this is important to understand because these people were not unaware, they were not disconnected. In many ways, they were deeply connected to their environment. They could read small signs, the movement of animals, the change in the wind, the behavior of birds. So when the land began to change, even slowly, they may have felt something, not clearly, not scientifically, but intuitively. Perhaps they noticed the shoreline shifting. Perhaps they saw places where water stayed longer than before. Perhaps they felt that something was different. But still life continued. Because change, when it is slow, is difficult to notice fully. Now, let us gently imagine something else. Even after the great wave, even after the sudden flooding, some parts of Doggerland may have remained above water for a time, broken pieces of a once larger world. These pieces would have felt like islands, small, separated, surrounded by water. And for the people living there, this would have been a new experience because before they lived on open land, now they were limited. Food sources changed, travel became harder, movement was restricted. And slowly, these small islands became less sustainable. So people moved again. They followed the land as it disappeared, always stepping back as the water stepped forward. This quiet retreat may have taken generations, not a single journey but many small movements over time. And in this slow migration, something important was happening. Knowledge was being carried. The people who moved into mainland Europe or into what would become Britain did not arrive empty. They brought their understanding of the land, their survival skills, their quiet awareness of nature. And perhaps they also brought their stories. Now this raises a very soft but interesting idea. Many ancient cultures across the world have stories of great floods, stories of water rising suddenly, stories of land being lost. These stories exist in different forms, different languages, different places, but they share a similar feeling, a memory of something powerful, something overwhelming, something that changed everything. Now we must be careful here. It does not mean all these stories come from the same event. The earth has seen many floods in many places. But it does make us wonder, could some of these ancient stories be distant echoes of real events like Doggerland, memories that became myths, experiences that became legends? Over time, details change. Stories become simpler or more symbolic, but the feeling remains. Water rising, land disappearing, people searching for safety. And as we sit here now, quietly listening, it feels both distant and strangely familiar. Because even today, we understand that the earth can change, not always suddenly, but always surely. Now let us move even deeper into another part of this quiet mystery. How do we know all of this? After all, no one wrote it down, no one recorded the moment. So how can we speak of Doggerland with any confidence? The answer is patience and careful observation. Scientists have spent many years studying the sea floor, using tools that can see beneath the water, mapping shapes, measuring depths, tracing patterns. It is a slow process, very slow, like putting together a puzzle without knowing the full picture. Each piece is small, a fragment of bone, a tool, a shape in the sand. But over time, these pieces begin to connect. For example, when fishermen pull up bones of land animals, it tells us something important. It tells us that those animals once lived on dry land in that exact place. When tools are found, it tells us humans were there, living, working, surviving. And when the sea floor shows shapes like rivers and valleys, it tells us that water once flowed there, not above, but within the land itself. All of these clues come together, slowly, quietly, carefully. And from them a picture forms, not perfect, not complete, but real enough to understand. Doggerland was once a living landscape, and it was lost through a combination of slow change and sudden events. Now, as time passes gently, let us reflect on something deeper. The people of Doggerland did not know their world would disappear. They did not see the full picture. They only saw what was in front of them, day by day, season by season. And in a quiet way, that is how we live too. We experience the present, we understand small changes, but the larger picture often remains hidden. This is not a weakness, it is simply the way human awareness works. But stories like this help us step back, help us see a little wider, a little deeper. They remind us that the world is always changing, even when it feels still. And sometimes the most important changes happen slowly in silence. Now, let us drift a little further into this story, because there is still more waiting beneath the surface, more quiet truths, more gentle mysteries. As the story continues to unfold, let us move even more gently into a deeper layer of understanding, not just of the land, but of time itself. Because when we speak about something that happened 6,500 years ago, it is easy to imagine it as a single distant moment, a fixed point in history. But in reality, it was not a moment. It was a long, slow transition. Imagine standing on that ancient land not for a day, but for a lifetime, watching the same horizon year after year. At first, nothing seems to change. The rivers flow as they always have. The animals follow familiar paths. The seasons come and go. But then very slowly something begins to feel different. A place where you once walked easily now feels softer under your feet. A path that was once dry becomes muddy. A river that was once narrow begins to widen. These are not dramatic changes. They are quiet, subtle, almost easy to ignore. But over years and then decades, they become impossible to miss. This is how Doggerland disappeared, not only through sudden events, but through the steady rhythm of nature. And this raises a gentle thought. Sometimes the most powerful forces are not loud, they are patient. Now let us imagine a child living in that time, a child born into a world where the land is already changing. To that child, this shifting world feels normal because they do not remember what came before. But an elder, someone who has lived many seasons, may notice the difference. They may remember a place that no longer exists, a distant field, a hunting ground, a path near the water, and they may speak of it quietly, telling the younger ones there was once land there, but the younger ones may find it hard to imagine, because for them that place has always been water. And so, even within a single community, there are different versions of reality, different memories, different understandings. This is how history slowly fades, not all at once, but piece by piece. Now let us move a little deeper into the moment of separation. There was a time when Britain was still connected to the mainland, a continuous stretch of land where people and animals could move freely. But as the sea continued to rise, that connection became thinner, narrower, weaker, until one day it was gone, not in a dramatic instant, but in a quiet, final shift. Water filled the last remaining low ground, and what was once a bridge became a barrier. Britain became an island. Now imagine being one of the last people to cross that land, walking across a path that had existed for thousands of years, not knowing that one day no one would ever walk there again. There is something deeply quiet about that thought, because it reminds us that many endings do not feel like endings, They feel like ordinary days. Now let us reflect on something else. Once Britain became an island, life there began to change in new ways. Isolation creates difference. Over time, animals evolve differently, plants grow in new patterns, and humans begin to develop unique cultures. This separation shaped history in ways that are still visible today. Languages, traditions, ways of living, all of these are influenced by geography, by land and water. And so the quiet flooding of Doggerland did not just remove a piece of land, it helped shape the future of entire regions. Now, as we continue to drift through this story, let us consider another gentle question. What does it mean for a place to be lost? Doggerland is gone, we cannot walk there, we cannot see it directly. And yet it still exists, in the shape of the sea floor, in the bones that are found, in the tools left behind, and perhaps in the distant memory of human stories. This is the nature of the past. It does not disappear completely. It becomes hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. Now let us move even deeper into the science behind this quiet transformation. The Earth is always in motion, even when it feels still. The land we stand on is part of large pieces called tectonic plates. These plates move very slowly, so slowly that we do not feel it. But over long periods of time, this movement changes everything. Mountains rise, oceans expand, continents shift. And during the end of the last ice age, another force was at work. Ice. Massive ice sheets covering large parts of the earth. Heavy, cold, ancient. As the climate warmed, these ice sheets began to melt. And as they melted, they released enormous amounts of water. This water flowed into the oceans, raising sea levels across the planet. This process took thousands of years, but its effects were powerful. Low-lying areas like Doggerland were especially vulnerable. They did not disappear instantly. They slowly sank beneath the rising sea. And occasionally, events like the Great Underwater Landslide added sudden changes to this slow process. Now, take a moment to imagine this, the Earth as a system, everything connected, ice, land, water, air. A change in one part affects all the others. This is what makes our planet both beautiful and complex. And it reminds us that we are part of this system too. Now, as your thoughts begin to slow and soften, let us gently move toward another layer of this story, a layer that is less about the past and more about what it quietly teaches us. Because stories like Doggerland are not just about what happened, they are about understanding, reflection, awareness. So let us continue slowly, calmly into that deeper reflection. As we move gently into this deeper reflection, let us slow everything down even more and simply sit with the idea of change. Because the story of Doggerland is not only about a lost land, it is about something much quieter, something that happens all around us. Even now, change that is so slow that it almost feels invisible. Imagine watching a shadow move across the ground. At first, it seems still, but if you wait long enough, you notice it has shifted. The earth changes in the same way, not always with noise, not always with sudden force, but often in silence. And this is what makes the story of Doggerland so calming and so mysterious at the same time. Nothing was rushed, nothing was announced. The land simply became something else. Now let us imagine another quiet moment. A group of people sitting together at the edge of what remains of their land. The sea is closer now than it once was, closer than it was in their childhood. They watch the water, they listen to its gentle movement. Perhaps they do not speak much, because some changes are felt more than they are explained. They may not have words like sea level rise or climate shift, but they understand in their own way that the world is not fixed. And there is something deeply human about that understanding, because even today we experience change in similar ways, not always suddenly, but gradually, quietly. And often we only fully understand it when we look back. Now let us move a little further into what this story reveals about memory. Human memory is powerful, but it is also fragile. We remember what is repeated, what is told, what is shared. But when something slowly disappears and no longer exists in daily life, it becomes harder to remember clearly. This is why Doggerland faded, not because it was unimportant, but because it became unreachable. No one could visit it, no one could point to it, no one could say it is still there. And so, over generations, it became a story, and then perhaps even less than a story, until only fragments remained. And yet, even fragments are enough. Enough to spark curiosity, enough to begin searching, enough to slowly rebuild what was lost. This is the quiet beauty of discovery. Now let us think about the people who study these things today. Scientists, researchers, explorers of the past. Their work is not fast, it is not loud. It is patient, careful, thoughtful. They spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, looking at small clues. A single bone, a piece of stone shaped by human hands, a pattern in the sand beneath the sea. Each clue by itself is small, but together they tell a story. Not a perfect story, not a complete one, but a meaningful one. And through this work, Doggerland returns, not as land, but as understanding. Now, as we continue this calm journey, let us gently explore another idea. What does it mean for something to be gone but still matter? Doggerland no longer exists as a place we can see, but its impact is still present. It shaped migration. It influenced where people went, how they lived, how they adapted. It helped create boundaries between land and water, between regions, between futures. And in this way, it continues to exist, not physically but historically. Now let your thoughts drift for a moment to the idea of hidden worlds. Right now beneath the oceans there are landscapes we have never fully seen, mountains, valleys, plains, places that once may have been above water, or places that formed slowly over time. The earth still holds many quiet secrets. And this is something both calming and inspiring, because it means there is always more to discover, more to understand, more to gently explore. Now, as the story continues to flow, let us move toward a final reflection for this part. The story of Doggerland teaches us something simple yet very deep. Nothing stays exactly the same. Not land, not water, not even memory. Everything changes, but not everything disappears. Some things transform, some things move, some things become hidden, and some things wait quietly to be found again. As you rest with this thought, allow your mind to soften even more, like the slow movement of water, like the quiet passing of time, because there is still more to this story, more layers to uncover, more gentle questions to explore. We have only just begun to understand this lost world and what it quietly tells us about our own. As we continue drifting through this quiet story, let us now turn our attention to something even more subtle, something that is not easy to see but can be gently felt. The idea of time layered upon itself. Because when we think about Doggerland, we often imagine a single version of it, one land, one moment. But in truth, Doggerland existed in many forms. At one time it was wide and open, full of life, rivers moving freely across its surface, animals traveling long distances without barriers. Then, slowly, came something else. Wetlands began to form, soft ground where water stayed longer than before, small lakes appearing where dry land once existed. The land itself was changing its character, and the people who lived there were living through these layers of change without ever seeing the full picture. Now imagine walking across that land at different points in time. In one moment, you walk across dry grass. In another, you step into shallow water. And in another, that same place is no longer reachable at all. This is how landscapes transform, not suddenly, but through many small versions of themselves. And this raises a quiet question: if we could somehow walk back through time step by step, what would we see? Perhaps we would see the land slowly breathing, expanding and shrinking, drying and flooding, changing again and again. Now, let us gently move toward another part of this story, one that connects the past to the present. Even today, the North Sea holds pieces of Doggerland, not visible from above, but resting below in silence. And sometimes, very quietly, it returns. Fishermen still find objects, pieces of bone, fragments of tools, even traces of ancient forests preserved beneath layers of sand. Imagine that for a moment, a tree that once stood under the open sky now resting beneath the ocean. Its roots, once reaching into the soil, now surrounded by water. This is not just history, is a transformation, and it reminds us that the boundary between land and sea is not fixed. It moves slowly, patiently. Now let us consider something even deeper, something that connects all of this together: awareness. The people of Doggerland lived within their world. They understood what they could see, feel, and experience. We today have a different kind of awareness. We can study the past. We can map the sea floor. We can imagine what once existed. But even now, our understanding is not complete. There are still gaps, still unknowns, still quiet mysteries, and perhaps there always will be, because the earth is vast and time is long. Now let us slow down even more and reflect on a gentle idea. What if the story of Doggerland is not just about the past, but also about how we see the present? We often think of the world as stable, reliable, permanent. But this story reminds us that stability is often temporary. Not in a frightening way, but in a natural way. Change is part of the system, part of the flow. Just like the tide moves in and out, the earth itself is always shifting. Now imagine the coastline you know today, a place that feels familiar, unchanging. And then imagine it thousands of years from now. It may not look the same, it may not even exist in the same form. And yet life will continue, just as it always has. Now let us return gently to the people of Doggerland. Not as a distant idea, but as real human lives. They laughed, they rested, they searched for food, they cared for one another. Their lives were simple but meaningful. And even though their land is gone, their existence is not erased, because they are part of the human story. A quiet chapter hidden beneath the sea, but still connected to everything that came after. Now, as your thoughts begin to drift more softly, let us move toward another layer of calm reflection. The story of Doggerland does not end suddenly. It fades, gently, like a sound that slowly becomes quieter until it blends into silence. But even in that silence, something remains. A sense of wonder, a quiet curiosity, a feeling that there is always more beneath the surface. And so we continue, slowly, calmly, because this story still has more to reveal, more to explore, more to understand as we continue to drift deeper into this quiet story. Let us now move towards something even more gentle, a feeling rather than a fact. The feeling of standing at the edge of something that is slowly disappearing. Not suddenly, not with noise, but with a quiet certainty. Imagine yourself there for a moment. You are standing on the soft ground of that ancient land. The air is cool, the sky is wide and pale. In the distance, you can hear the sea, closer than it used to be. You do not feel afraid, but you do feel something different, a quiet awareness. The kind of awareness that does not need words. You notice that the land beneath your feet feels slightly damp, that the path you once walked has changed, that the horizon looks unfamiliar. And yet, everything still feels calm. This is the strange nature of slow change. It does not demand attention, it simply continues. Now, let us gently step away from this moment and look at it from afar. Because when we zoom out, we begin to see something larger. Doggerland was not the only place affected by rising seas. All around the world, coastlines were shifting. Land was being reshaped. In some places, the changes were small. In others, they were more dramatic. But everywhere, the same quiet process was unfolding. The earth adjusting, balancing, changing. Now this brings us to another soft question. Why do some events remain in memory while others fade away? The great wave, the sudden flood. Those are the kinds of moments that leave strong impressions. They are intense, unforgettable. But the slow rising of the sea, the gradual loss of land, these are harder to remember because they do not happen all at once. They do not have a clear beginning or end. And so they slip quietly into the background until they are only noticed in hindsight. Now, let us move a little deeper into this idea. If you were to tell someone a story, you might focus on the dramatic moment, the wave, the flood, the sudden change. because those moments are easier to describe, easier to imagine. But the truth of Doggerland is more gentle than that. It is a story of patience, of time, of slow transformation, and perhaps that is why it feels so calming to explore. Now let us think about the sea itself. Today, when we look at the ocean, we often see it as something separate, a boundary, a distance between lands. But in the time of Doggerland, that boundary was moving. The sea was not fixed. It was advancing, quietly, steadily. And in doing so, it was creating the world we know today. This is something easy to forget. The map we see now feels permanent, but it is only a snapshot, a single moment in a very long story. Now, as your mind begins to settle even more, let us reflect on a final thought for this part. There is a certain calmness in knowing that change is natural, not something to resist, not something to fear, but something to understand. The people of Doggerland did not have control over what was happening, but they adapted, they moved, they continued. And in doing so, they became part of a larger story. A story that stretches across time, across land, across generations. And now, as we sit here quietly listening, we are also part of that story. Not in the same way, but in a connected way. Because the earth we live on today is shaped by those past moments, by lands that once existed, and by waters that slowly took their place. Now, let your thoughts drift gently like water moving across a quiet surface, because there is still more to explore, more to feel, more to understand. This story has not reached its end, it is simply unfolding slowly. As we continue to move gently through this story, let us now turn toward something even quieter, almost invisible, the idea of traces. Because when something disappears, it rarely vanishes completely. Instead, it leaves behind small signs, soft echoes, tiny pieces of itself. Doggerland is like that. It is gone as a place, but not gone as a presence. Imagine walking along a beach today. The waves move slowly in and out. The sand shifts beneath your feet. And somewhere beneath that water, far below the surface, there are shapes. Old river paths, ancient soil, the remains of forests. You cannot see them directly, but they are there. This is what we mean by traces. Now let us imagine a fisherman out at sea. The day is calm, the water is steady. He lowers his nets and waits. When he pulls them back up among the fish, there is something unusual. A piece of bone, heavy, worn by time. He may not think much of it at first, but over time more things appear. Another bone, a shaped stone, something that does not belong to the sea. These are quiet messages from the past. They do not speak loudly. They do not explain themselves, but they invite curiosity. And this is how discovery begins, not with certainty, but with a question. Now let us move a little deeper into this idea. Each object found beneath the sea carries a small piece of information. A bone can tell us what kind of animal lived there. A tool can tell us how people worked. A piece of wood can tell us about the environment. Individually, they are simple, but together they form a pattern. And patterns help us understand. This is how the lost world of Doggerland is slowly being revealed. not through one big discovery, but through many small ones. Now let us imagine something else, something even more subtle: sound. When the great wave came, it must have made a sound, a deep, powerful, roaring sound, the kind of sound that fills the air and stays in the memory. But today that sound is gone. There is no echo of it in the present, no trace we can hear. And yet, in a quiet way, we can still imagine it. Not exactly, but gently. This is another kind of trace, a trace in the mind. Now, as we move further into reflection, let us consider something deeper. What is the difference between what is lost and what is hidden? Doggerland feels lost because we cannot see it, we cannot visit it, but in reality it is hidden, still there beneath layers of water and sand, waiting. And this changes the way we think about the past. The past is not gone. It is simply out of reach. Now let us slow down even more and return to the people. Because in the end, this story is not only about land, it is about human experience. Imagine the last communities living on the remaining pieces of Doggerland, small groups separated by water. Their world is quieter now, more limited. Travel is harder, resources are fewer. And yet life continues. They still wake with the sun, still gather food, still share moments of rest. There is something peaceful in that continuity. Even as the world changes, life finds a way to continue. Now let us gently move toward another thought. If we could speak to those people, what would we ask? Perhaps we would ask, what did the land look like? What did you feel when the water came? Did you know it would not stop? But they would not answer in the way we expect. They would not use scientific words. They would not explain processes. They would simply describe their experience. The feeling of the ground, the sound of the water, the memory of places that are no longer there. And in that simple sharing, we would understand something important. Knowledge is not only in facts, it is also in experience. Now, as your mind becomes even more calm, let us move toward another layer of quiet understanding. The story of Doggerland is not complete. It never will be. There will always be missing pieces, unknown details, unanswered questions. But perhaps that is what makes it meaningful, because it invites us to imagine, to wonder, to gently explore. And in that exploration, we connect with something deeper, a sense of time, a sense of change, a sense of being part of a much larger story. Now, let your thoughts drift softly like waves moving across a quiet sea, because we are still within this story, still moving through it, still uncovering its quiet layers. As we continue to move softly through this story, let us now turn towards something even more delicate, the idea of endings that do not feel like endings. Because when we imagine the disappearance of Doggerland, it is easy to picture a final moment, a last day, a clear ending. But in truth, there was no single ending, no moment when everyone suddenly knew this is the end. Instead, there were many small endings, quiet ones. A path that was used for generations, slowly covered by water, never walked again. A place where people once gathered, gradually becoming unreachable. A hunting ground that slowly disappeared beneath the rising sea. Each of these was an ending, but none of them felt complete on their own. And this is something very human. We often do not recognize endings when they happen. We only understand them later, when we look back, when we remember. Now, let us imagine one of these quiet endings. A person walking along a familiar path. They have walked this way many times before. But today the ground feels different, softer. The water is closer, closer than yesterday, closer than last season. They pause, look out toward the horizon. Perhaps they feel something, a quiet realization. But they continue walking because life continues. And this is how Doggerland faded, not with a single moment of loss, but with many small moments of change. Now let us move gently into another thought. If there was no clear ending, then there was also no clear beginning to the loss. The process had already begun long before anyone noticed. The melting ice, the rising sea, the shifting land, all of these were part of a slow unfolding, and this reminds us of something important. Not all stories have clear boundaries. Some stories blend into each other, flow into each other. The end of one world becomes the beginning of another. Now, let us reflect on what came after. Once Doggerland was gone, the world did not become empty. New patterns formed, new coastlines appeared, new ways of living emerged. People adapted to the new geography. They learned to live with the sea, to travel along it, to use it. In a quiet way, the loss of Doggerland helped shape the relationship between humans and the ocean. Now the sea was not just something distant, it was something present, something important. And over time, humans became more connected to it. Now, as we continue drifting through this calm reflection, let us consider another gentle question. What would the world look like if Doggerland had never disappeared? Perhaps Britain would still be connected to Europe. Perhaps migration patterns would be different. Perhaps cultures would have developed in new ways. But this is only a thought, a quiet imagining. Because the world we know today is shaped by what did happen, not by what could have happened. And there is something peaceful in accepting that. Now let us move even deeper into the feeling of this story. There is a certain stillness in thinking about a land beneath the sea, a place where time feels paused, where movement is slow, where everything rests. Doggerland now exists in that stillness, not as a busy living place, but as a quiet memory of what once was. And yet it is not empty. It holds layers of history, layers of life, layers of change, all resting beneath the water. Now, as your thoughts begin to drift even more gently, let us move toward another soft reflection. The story of Doggerland is not loud. It does not demand attention. It simply exists, waiting to be noticed. And in noticing it, we begin to understand something deeper, that the world is always changing, that time moves slowly, that even the largest transformations can happen quietly. Now let your mind rest with that thought like a calm surface of water. Because we are still within this story, still moving slowly through it, still uncovering its quiet truths. As we continue drifting gently through this quiet story, let us now move towards something even softer, almost like a whisper in time. The idea of what remains even after everything has changed. Because even though Doggerland is gone, something of it still lives on. Not in a physical way that we can easily see, but in subtle, almost invisible connections. Think for a moment about the people who left that land, the ones who slowly moved away as the water followed them. They did not leave empty-handed. They carried habits, ways of thinking, ways of observing the world. They understood the rhythm of nature, the movement of animals, the quiet signs of weather and seasons. And when they settled in new places, those understandings went with them. So in a very quiet way, Doggerland continued to exist through them. Now let us imagine a later generation, people living in what has now become Britain, separated from the mainland by water. They may not remember Doggerland clearly. They may not even know it existed as a place. But some small parts of it remain in the way they move, in the way they live, in the way they understand the land and sea. This is how the past continues, not always through clear memory, but through subtle influence. Now let us gently turn to another thought: water itself. The same water that slowly covered Doggerland is still part of the oceans today, moving, flowing, circulating around the earth. In a quiet sense, the water remembers, not in thoughts or words, but in presence. It has touched that land, moved across it, covered it, and now it continues its journey. This idea may feel unusual, but it brings a certain calmness, because it reminds us that nothing is truly separate. Everything is part of a larger flow. Now, as we move deeper into this calm reflection, let us consider something even more gentle. If you were to stand by the sea today and look out across the water, you would see only waves, only movement, only the present moment. But beneath that surface there is a hidden story, a story of land, of people, of slow and quiet change. And knowing that story changes the way we see the sea. It is no longer just water, it becomes a place of memory. Now let us slow down even more and reflect on a final idea for this part. There is a certain peace in knowing that the world does not stand still. That change is not something sudden and harsh, but often something gentle and continuous. Doggerland did not vanish in a single breath. It slowly became something else. And in that slow transformation there is a kind of quiet beauty, a reminder that endings can also be transitions, that loss can also be change, and that even when something disappears, it may still exist in another form. Now, let your thoughts settle like soft waves reaching the shore, because this story is still not complete. There are still more layers to uncover, more quiet reflections to explore, more gentle ideas waiting beneath the surface. As we continue to drift gently through this story, let us now move toward something even deeper, something that sits quietly beneath all the facts, the feeling of connection. Because when we listen to a story like this, it may seem distant, far away in time, almost like another world. But in a quiet way, it is not so far from us. The people of Doggerland lived under the same sky, felt the same wind, watched the same sun rise and set. Their world was different, but the experience of being human was not so different at all. They wondered, they observed, they adapted. And in that way we are connected to them. Now let us imagine a quiet evening on that ancient land. The light is fading. Sky is turning soft shades of gray and blue. A small group of people sits together, perhaps near a fire, perhaps near the edge of the land where the sea now feels closer. They do not speak loudly, they do not need to. The day has been long, simple, full of small tasks, and now there is only rest. In that quiet moment, there is no thought of history, no awareness of being part of a larger story. There is only the present, and this is something we share with them. Because even now, we live moment by moment, day by day. We rarely feel the full weight of time. We rarely see the long patterns of change. We simply live within them. Now let us move gently into another thought, the idea of perspective. From the point of view of a single person, the changes in Doggerland may have felt small, manageable. But from a wider perspective, looking across centuries, the change was immense. An entire land slowly disappearing, a new coastline being formed, a separation between lands emerging. This difference in perspective is important because it reminds us that the way we see the world depends on how far we look. Close up, everything feels stable, understandable. But when we step back, we begin to see movement, transformation. Now let us gently apply this idea to our own world. There may be changes happening now that feel small, unnoticeable. But over time, they may become something much larger. Just like the slow rising of the sea thousands of years ago. This is not something to worry about. It is simply something to understand, to notice. Now, as your mind becomes even more calm, let us return once more to the quiet image of Doggerland beneath the sea. Dark, still, silent, but not empty. It holds stories, not written but present, stories of movement, of life, of quiet change. And perhaps there is something comforting in that, because it reminds us that nothing is ever completely lost. It may change form, it may become hidden, but it remains in some way. Now let us slow down even more and rest in a final reflection for this part. The story of Doggerland is not just about a flood. It is about time, about patience, about the quiet power of change. It is about how the world shapes us and how we move within it. And as we listen, as we drift through these thoughts, we become part of that understanding. A quiet awareness that stretches across time. Now let your thoughts soften completely like the surface of calm water at night. Because the story still continues slowly, gently, as we continue to drift deeper into this calm and quiet journey, let us now move towards something even more subtle, something that is not about the land or the water, but about the way we understand stories themselves. Because the story of Doggerland reaches us in fragments, small pieces, clues scattered across time, and our mind gently tries to bring them together. This is how humans have always made sense of the world, not by knowing everything, but by slowly connecting what we can see. Now, imagine you are holding a few pieces of a puzzle, not the full picture, just a few shapes. At first, they may not seem meaningful, but as you turn them and place them side by side, a pattern begins to appear. That is exactly how Doggerland has been rediscovered. A bone found in a fishing net, a tool shaped by human hands, a hidden river beneath the sea floor, each one a small piece, and over time they form a quiet image of a lost world. Now let us move a little deeper into this idea. Even with all these discoveries, there are still many things we do not know. We do not know the names of the people who lived there. We do not know their exact thoughts. We do not know the details of their final days on that land. And yet, we can still understand something about them. We can understand their lives through patterns, through similarities, through simple human experience. They needed food, they needed shelter, they cared for one another. These are things that do not change. Now, as we gently reflect on this, let us consider another quiet thought. Sometimes not knowing everything is part of what makes a story peaceful. There is no pressure to solve it completely, no need to find every answer. We can simply observe, gently, and allow the mystery to remain. Now let us turn once more to the sea above Doggerland. If you were to travel across it today, you would see only open water, endless, moving, calm. Ships pass over it, waves rise and fall, and yet none of it reveals what lies beneath. This is something very interesting because it shows us how easily the past can be hidden by the present. What we see now covers what once was, and without careful observation we might never know. Now let us move even deeper into the idea of hidden layers. The earth is full of them. Layers of soil, layers of rock, layers of time, each one holding a different moment, a different story. Doggerland is one such layer, not visible but present. And when we learn to look beyond the surface, we begin to see these layers more clearly. Now, as your thoughts become slower, more relaxed, let us gently return to the human side of this story. Because in the end, it is people who give meaning to places. Without people, land is simply land. But with people, it becomes home. Doggerland was once a home, not in a grand or complex way, but in a simple human way. A place of daily life, of small routines, of quiet moments. And even though that home is gone, the idea of it remains. A reminder that every place we live is part of a longer story. Now, let us slow down even more and settle into a final reflection for this part. There is something deeply calming in realizing that we do not need to rush to understand everything. Some stories are meant to be explored slowly, like a long walk across a quiet landscape. And Doggerland is one of those stories. It does not demand answers, it invites curiosity. It allows us to sit with the unknown, and in doing so, it gives us a sense of peace. Now, let your mind rest gently like the stillness beneath the sea, because this journey is still continuing, still unfolding, still moving. Softly through time, as we continue this slow and quiet journey, let us now move towards something even more gentle, a feeling that often goes unnoticed, the feeling of distance. Not just distance in space, but distance in time. Because Doggerland is not only far beneath the sea, it is far behind us in time. So far that it almost feels unreachable. And yet, through stories like this, we begin to bridge that distance. Not completely, but enough to feel a quiet connection. Now imagine standing at the edge of the sea today. The horizon stretches far into the distance, calm, endless, still. You know that beyond that horizon there are places you cannot see. Doggerland is like that, a place beyond the horizon of time. We cannot step into it, we cannot walk its land, but we can imagine it gently, calmly, and in that imagination it begins to feel real again. Now let us move a little deeper into the idea of imagination itself. Imagination is not only about creating something new. Sometimes it is about carefully rebuilding something that once existed, piece by piece, detail by detail, not perfectly but thoughtfully. This is what we are doing now. We are not inventing Doggerland. We are remembering it in the only way we can, through quiet understanding, through gentle reflection. Now, as your thoughts begin to slow even further, let us return once more to the people of that land, not as distant figures, but as real lives. Perhaps there was someone who loved to walk near the river, someone who knew exactly where fish could be found, someone who watched the sky and understood the weather. These are small details, but they make the past feel closer, because even across thousands of years, human life carries familiar patterns. Now let us imagine one final quiet scene for this part. The sea has already taken much of the land. What remains is small, a narrow stretch of ground, surrounded by water. A few people stand there looking out, not speaking. There is no panic, no rush, only a quiet awareness that things have changed and will continue to change. This moment does not feel like an ending. It feels like a pause, a transition. Now let us gently step away from that scene and look at the larger picture once more. Doggerland did not disappear in a single story. It faded across many moments, many lives, many generations. And because of that, it does not belong to one memory. It belongs to time itself. Now, as we move toward a soft closing for this part, let us reflect on something simple yet meaningful. There is a quiet beauty in things that are not fully known. They invite us to slow down, to listen, to imagine. Doggerland is one of those quiet mysteries, not loud, not demanding, but always present just beneath the surface. Now let your thoughts settle gently. Like the calm surface of the sea at dusk, because the story is still flowing, still unfolding, still guiding us slowly through time, as we continue to drift softly through this story. Let us now move toward something even more peaceful, a sense of stillness. Because when we think about Doggerland now, it is no longer a place of movement, no longer filled with footsteps or flowing rivers. It rests beneath layers of water, beneath shifting sand, in a kind of quiet stillness that has lasted for thousands of years. Imagine that stillness for a moment. No voices, no wind moving across open grass, no animals crossing the land, only the slow, gentle movement of water above, and beneath that a landscape frozen in time, not frozen in the way of ice, but preserved in silence. Now let us gently reflect on this idea. There is something calming about places that are still, places where time feels paused. Doggerland has become one of those places. Even though time continues above it, ships passing, waves rising and falling, storms moving across the sea, below there is quiet. And in that quiet there is memory. Not memory as we usually think of it, but a kind of presence. The land is still there, the shapes of rivers, the outlines of hills, all resting just out of sight. Now let us move a little deeper into this feeling. What does it mean for something to rest for so long? Thousands of years without disturbance, without change in the way we experience it. It becomes something different, not part of daily life, not part of active memory, but part of the deep background of the world, something that exists without needing attention. Now, as your thoughts become even more calm, let us consider something else. If Doggerland had not been covered by water, it would have continued to change, to evolve, to become something new. But because it was submerged, it was preserved in a different way, hidden but held in place. This creates a quiet contrast. Above the sea, everything moves, everything changes. Below, everything rests. Now let us gently return to the idea of discovery. Even in this stillness, Doggerland is not completely unreachable. With careful effort, with patience, with curiosity, we can still learn from it. Not by walking across it, but by listening to the clues it offers. And this is something very human. The desire to understand, to look beyond what is visible. Now let us slow down even more and bring this part toward a soft reflection. There is a quiet comfort in knowing that the world holds layers of time, some active, some hidden, some resting. Doggerland belongs to that hidden, resting layer, a place that no longer moves with us but still exists alongside us. And perhaps that is what makes it so calming to think about. It does not demand anything. It does not change quickly. It simply is. Now let your thoughts settle into that stillness like a calm, deep ocean at night. Because this story is still not finished, it continues to flow softly, slowly through time as we continue this slow and gentle journey. Let us now move towards something even more quiet, almost like a thought that appears and then softly fades, the idea of what we choose to remember. Because throughout this story, we have been slowly uncovering something that was once forgotten. Not because it was unimportant, but because it became distant, hidden, out of reach. And this makes us wonder how many other stories exist like this. Stories that are not gone, but simply waiting. Now let us imagine a different time. Thousands of years after Doggerland disappeared, people are living in new places, new lands, new environments. Their lives are full. Their days are busy with survival, with growth, with change. And slowly, the old stories begin to fade. Not intentionally, not suddenly, but gently, because new experiences take their place, new memories form, and the past becomes quieter, until one day it is no longer spoken of. This is not loss in a dramatic sense. It is simply the natural flow of memory. Now let us move a little deeper into this idea. Even today there are things we forget, places we once knew that change or disappear. And over time, they become harder to remember clearly. But sometimes something small brings them back. A sound, a smell, a familiar feeling. and suddenly a memory returns. In a very quiet way, the discovery of Doggerland is like that. A memory returning, not fully but enough to be felt again. Now, as we continue to drift through this calm reflection, let us consider something even more gentle. What does it mean to rediscover something? It is not the same as seeing it for the first time. It is softer than that, more patient. It is a process of slowly recognizing something that was always there but hidden. And this recognition brings a quiet satisfaction, not excitement, not intensity, but a calm sense of understanding. Now let us return once more to the sea. The surface moves, the waves rise and fall, but below there are layers of silence, and within those layers stories rest. Doggerland is one of those stories, not loud, not urgent, but present. And as we listen to it, we are not just learning about the past, we are practicing something deeper, the ability to slow down, to notice, to gently explore. Now, as your thoughts become even more soft, let us move toward a quiet reflection. There is something peaceful in knowing that not everything needs to be fully understood. Some things can remain partially hidden, partially known, and still be meaningful. Doggerland teaches us this. It invites us to sit with the unknown, to feel comfortable in not having every answer. Now, let your mind rest in that gentle space between knowing and wondering, because the story is still continuing, still unfolding, still guiding us quietly through time. As we continue to move gently through this story, let us now turn towards something even more subtle, something that sits quietly beneath everything we have explored so far, the idea of acceptance. Because in the story of Doggerland, there is no struggle against the change, no attempt to stop the sea, no way to hold the land in place. There is only movement, adjustment, continuation, and this may feel unusual to us, because we often think of change as something to resist, something to control. But in this ancient story, change simply happens. The land shifts, the water rises, people move, not with resistance, but with quiet understanding. Now let us imagine this more clearly. A group of people standing at the edge of their land. The sea is closer than before. The ground has changed. They do not try to stop it. They do not argue with it. They simply observe, and then they adapt. They move slightly inland. They change their paths. They find new places to gather food. This is not defeat. It is a form of quiet wisdom, an understanding that some things are beyond control. Now let us move a little deeper into this idea. Acceptance does not mean inaction. It means understanding what can be changed and what cannot. The people of Doggerland could not stop the sea, but they could change their response. And in doing so, they continued. Now, as your thoughts become even more calm, let us reflect on how this connects to us. Even in our modern world, there are changes we cannot fully control. Time passes, environments shift, life moves forward, and like those ancient people, we adjust, sometimes without even realizing it. Now let us return once more to the quiet image of the submerged land. Doggerland rests beneath the sea, not resisting, not changing rapidly, simply existing in a new form, and this brings a certain peace. because it shows us that change does not always erase. Sometimes it transforms. Now let us move toward a soft reflection for this part. The story of Doggerland is not only about loss, it is about transition, a movement from one state to another, from land to sea, from presence to memory. And within that transition, there is a quiet balance. Nothing is forced, nothing is rushed. Everything unfolds in its own time. Now let your thoughts settle into that feeling, a calm acceptance, like waves gently reaching the shore, because this story is still not finished. It continues softly, slowly, as we continue to drift quietly through this long and gentle story. Let us now move towards something even deeper, something that is not about land or water or even time, but about perspective within silence. Because there is a certain kind of understanding that only appears when everything becomes still. The story of Doggerland has slowly taken us through movement, through change, through loss, through discovery, and now it brings us to a place where everything feels quiet, not empty but calm. Imagine the surface of the sea at night, no strong waves, no wind, just a soft, steady stillness. Beneath that surface, the remains of an ancient world rest silently. And above it, the sky stretches wide and endless. In this moment, there is no urgency, no need to search for answers, only the feeling of being present. Now let us gently reflect on this. Throughout history, there have been many events, some loud, some dramatic, some sudden, but the story of Doggerland is different. It does not ask for attention. It does not demand to be remembered. It simply exists in a quiet corner of time. And perhaps that is why it feels so calming to explore, because it allows us to slow down, to step away from noise, to sit with something that unfolds gently. Now let us move a little deeper into the feeling of silence itself. Silence is often seen as empty, but in truth, a silence holds many things. It holds memory, it holds presence, it holds the space where understanding can grow. Doggerland exists in that kind of silence, not speaking but still telling a story. And as we listen, not with urgency but with patience, we begin to understand it in a different way, not as a sequence of events but as a feeling, a slow transformation, a quiet passage of time. Now, as your thoughts become even softer, let us gently bring together what we have felt so far. A land that once existed, full of life, movement, and quiet human moments. A slow change, almost invisible at first. A sudden wave, a powerful shift, and then a gradual fading, until only silence remained. And yet, even in that silence, the story continues. Now let us rest in one final image for this part. The sea, calm and endless, stretching across the horizon, and far below a hidden landscape, untouched by light, holding within it the quiet memory of a world that once was. There is no need to reach it, no need to uncover everything. It is enough to know that it exists, and that it has gently shaped the world we live in today. Now, let your mind settle completely like the deep ocean at rest, because this journey is still ongoing, still flowing slowly through time, still offering quiet thoughts and gentle understanding. As we continue to move softly through this long, quiet journey, let us now turn towards something even more gentle, a feeling that sits at the very edge of awareness, the sense of continuity. Because even though Doggerland is gone, even though its land rests beneath the sea, the story itself has never truly stopped. It has simply changed form, from living land to silent memory, from daily life to quiet discovery, and now to this moment where you are listening. In a way, the story has reached you, not as something loud or urgent, but as something soft and thoughtful. And this is how continuity works, not through constant visibility, but through quiet connection. Now, let us imagine time not as a straight line, but as a slow, flowing river. Everything that has happened still exists somewhere along its path. Doggerland is there, resting in one part of that flow, and we are here in another, but the river connects us. Now let us gently explore this idea further. The people who once lived on that land could not imagine the world we live in today. They could not see the future, just as we cannot fully see what will come next. And yet, we are all part of the same unfolding story, each moment leading quietly into the next. Now, as your thoughts slow even more, let us return to a simple image. A single drop of water falling into the sea. It creates a small ripple. That ripple spreads outward, touching other ripples, blending into a larger movement. The disappearance of Doggerland was like that, a change that created ripples through time, ripples that shaped migration, land boundaries, human life, and eventually the world as we know it. Now, let us pause with that thought, because it reminds us of something very calm, very grounding, that even small changes can become part of something much larger. Now, let us move gently into another reflection. The story we have been following has no clear ending because it is still connected to the present. The sea that covers Doggerland still moves today. The land that was shaped by its loss still exists, and the understanding we gain from it continues to grow. So rather than ending, this story simply becomes quieter, more distant, but never completely finished. Now, as your mind becomes even more relaxed, let us rest in one final thought for this part. There is something deeply peaceful in knowing that we are part of a continuous flow of time, that the past is not separate from us, but gently connected, and that even the quietest stories can travel across thousands of years to reach us. Now, let your thoughts drift slowly, like a calm river moving through the night, because this journey is still unfolding, still continuing, still inviting you to move deeper. Whenever you are ready, we can continue further into this quiet and endless story. As we continue this slow and gentle journey, let us now move towards something even more subtle, a space where thought itself begins to soften. Because after traveling so far through time, through land, water, memory, and silence, we begin to notice something quietly changing within us. The need to understand becomes softer. The need to know every detail begins to fade. And in its place, there is simply awareness. Awareness of the story, awareness of time passing, awareness of the quiet connection between everything. Now let us imagine once more the sea above Doggerland, It moves gently, not rushing, not stopping, always in motion yet always calm. And beneath it the land rests, unmoving, silent. This contrast, movement above, stillness below, creates a kind of balance. And as we sit with this image, our thoughts begin to follow that same rhythm. Some thoughts move gently passing through the mind, and others settle becoming still. Now let us move a little deeper into this quiet space. The story we have been exploring does not need a conclusion. It does not need a final answer, because it reflects something much larger, the ongoing nature of the world itself. There is no final moment, only continuous change. Now imagine standing at the edge of the sea once more. The horizon stretches endlessly, the sky and water meeting in a soft line. There is nothing to solve, nothing to reach, only the quiet presence of the moment. And in that moment, everything feels complete even without an ending. Now let us gently return to the idea of Doggerland one last time for this part. Not as a place that was lost, but as a place that changed. A place that moved from one form into another, from land to sea, from daily life to quiet memory, and now to a calm understanding within us. Because as you listen, as you imagine, as you gently reflect, you are giving that lost world a kind of presence again, not physically but mentally, and that is enough. Now, as your thoughts become slower, softer, more distant, let everything settle, like the deep ocean at rest, like the quiet night sky. There is no need to go further too quickly. This story can continue as long as you wish, flowing gently, without pressure, without urgency. And whenever you feel ready, we can drift even deeper into the calm, endless rhythm of this quiet world. As we continue to drift, even more slowly now, let us enter a space where the story becomes softer than words, a place where understanding is no longer something we search for, but something we simply feel. Because after walking through this long journey across land that no longer exists, across time that feels distant and quiet, we arrive at something very simple, a sense of presence. Not the presence of Doggerland as it once was, but the presence of the idea itself. A land that existed, a people who lived, a change that came, and a memory that remains in a quiet way. Now let us imagine something very gentle. You are not looking at the sea anymore. You are not thinking about maps or history or time. You are simply resting. And somewhere, in the background of your thoughts, there is a soft awareness of a land beneath the water, not clearly defined, not detailed, just a feeling. And that feeling does not disturb you. It does not ask for attention. It simply exists. Now let us move even deeper into that stillness. The story has slowed so much that it no longer feels like a story. It feels like a quiet space, a space where thoughts come and go like small ripples on water. There is no beginning here, no ending, only a gentle continuation. And in that continuation there is calm. Now, if we return for just a moment to everything we have passed through, the rising seas, the shifting land, the quiet lives of people, the sudden wave, the slow fading, the silent resting beneath the ocean, all of it now feels distant, softened, like something remembered just before sleep. And this is where the story was always leading, not toward a conclusion but toward rest. Now, let your thoughts drift freely. No need to follow any direction. If an image comes, let it pass. If a thought appears, let it fade, like waves touching the shore and then gently pulling away. Because in the end, the story of Doggerland is not something to hold tightly. It is something to release, to allow it to settle into the quiet background of the mind, just like the land itself settled beneath the sea. Now everything becomes still. The sea above calm, the land below silent, the mind within at rest. And in this stillness, there is nothing more that needs to be said, nothing more that needs to be understood, only the quiet comfort of a story that continues without needing an end. And now, as everything has become so soft, so still, let us drift even further into that quiet space between thoughts. There is no longer a need to imagine clearly, no need to see the land or the sea or the people. All of it has gently faded into a feeling, a calm, steady presence, like the distant sound of water barely heard but always there. This is where the story rests now, not in details, not in events, but in stillness. If a thought rises, let it rise slowly and then let it pass. If an image forms, let it appear gently and then soften. There is no need to hold onto anything, because just like Doggerland, everything finds its place in time. Nothing is rushed, nothing is forced. Everything moves at its own quiet pace. Now, imagine the night sky above the ocean, wide, endless, silent. The stars faint and distant, the horizon barely visible, and below the deep, calm sea holding within it layers of time. There is no separation between past and present here, only a gentle continuity. You are not observing it anymore. You are simply within it, breathing slowly, thinking softly, resting. The story has become part of the quiet around you. No beginning, no ending. Only a slow, endless drifting. And in that drifting, there is peace. A deep, steady calm that asks nothing from you. Now let everything become even lighter, even slower, like a final ripple on still water, fading softly into silence. And now, very gently, we come to a place where the story can rest. Not with a sudden ending, not with a final moment, but with a soft understanding. Doggerland, the land that once existed, the land that slowly changed, the land that faded beneath the sea, has now become something else. Not just a place in history, but a quiet reminder. A reminder that the world is always moving, even when it feels still. That change does not always arrive with noise, but often with silence. And that even when something disappears, it does not truly vanish. It transforms. Now, there is no need to imagine the wave anymore. No need to picture the land or follow the people who once lived there. Everything has gently settled. Like the ocean after movement, like the sky after sunset, calm, still, complete. The story has not been lost. It has simply found its place in the quiet background of time. And now it can rest there. As you rest, breathing slowly, thinking softly, let the last traces of this story fade like distant ripples until there is only stillness, only calm, only quiet. And in that quiet, everything is enough. Good night.